Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Esoteric and our continuing series, Emulation Night School, where I go over some of the best emulators that you can use on your Windows PC, show you how to set them up, go through all of the settings, and get you playing retro games without having to go through ridiculous old school hardware like an original PlayStation 1 or a PSX imported from Japan here. We're going to be showing you guys DuckStation, which I consider one of the best emulators ever made. It is absolutely spectacular both in its ease of use as well as its feature set. Before we get too far involved, though, do me a huge favor, go down below, hit like and subscribe, and ring that notification bell. Definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined and want to support the channel, we got a Patreon link down below as well. And now I do have that Emulation Night School tier, so if you need specialized help, you can sign up to my Patreon and get direct access to me, and I'll help you with whatever you need. But getting right into DuckStation, it's extremely easy to download. You just go to the DuckStation website, see that incredible Duck logo right there. I absolutely love him. And you're going to see you have options for Windows, Androids, or other platforms. This is a Windows-based tutorial, but on other platforms you can get a Windows release for ARM-based processors. It doesn't have to be x64. You can choose either or. If you want to use Mac or Android, things like that, you would need a different tutorial for a little bit of this. But go ahead and just click the Windows download, and you'll see here that you need the VC++ runtime to be installed first before you use DuckStation. If you've used any emulators, chances are you have this, but if you've ever emulated before, just download that and install it. It's like installing any program, and then you just click download Duck, and you have it. Just be aware that on the wiki where they answer questions for you, currently it just gives you a 404 error, so you're going to have to pay attention to this tutorial to get all the steps done. And please don't skip ahead. So many people do ask me a question about the video, and I tell them it's at minute X. But we have all the files we need here, including the 3 BIOS files. They're marked SCPH 5500, 5501, and 5502.bin. That is for the US, PAL, and Japanese territories. You should be dumping these BIOS from your own console. It is totally permissible. If you have it, go ahead and do it. But these are the 3 BIOS files we need. So we'll go ahead and take the DuckStation zip we downloaded and extract it. DuckStation doesn't install wherever you extract it, where you're going to use it from, so just pick a place and make sure you like where it is. You can delete the zip file from there. These 4 games I have in my collection, so I'm going to go ahead and extract them into their folderized contents. Now, DuckStation supports many different formats. I like using BinQ because I've never had a problem with it whatsoever. I know a lot of people like CHD to save space. It's totally up to you what you want. But if I go into the Pepsi Man folder here, you're going to see it's in BinQ format. Again, this isn't really super important. It's whatever you like to use, but I've never once had a problem with the BinQ format, so that is what I decide to use for this tutorial. If you want to use CHD, it's very easy as well. Now the next thing I'm going to do is make a folder and call it Games. This is where we're going to target DuckStation to look for all of the games we have installed. Again, it doesn't matter where you put it. You can put it anywhere you want. We're just going to point a target to it, but just make sure it's someplace safe so you don't accidentally delete it. Once we have that done, we can go ahead into the DuckStation folder and just launch. You'll see here all of the different formats that it needs to look for, and it's not finding anything right now because we haven't told it where to look, but you get this entire list of all the different file extensions that work, including the Q sheet. So we'll go ahead and hit Add Games Directory, and we will navigate back to where we put that games folder. If you click it and hit select, it's going to find all of the games, and you're going to get this pop-up if you want to scan recursively. This will look in all the subfolders and find all the games that DuckStation recognizes as PlayStation 1 games that will work, and as soon as we hit yes within like a second, the 4 games I showed you have populated on the DuckStation window and are now ready to run. But we need to tell it where the BIOS is as well, so if you go into settings and BIOS, you're going to see a BIOS directory. Now I have a different installation of DuckStation that I used before this tutorial, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch this to where the BIOS files I just showed you are. Just make sure you remember where you put them. They will not appear in the file structure. It's not going to have a file extension. Just go to the folder they're contained within, and it will find them. If the game launches, you know you're good. And as far as the BIOS, I just leave everything as auto detect. I've never had a problem with this whatsoever, so do not change any of those drop down menus. DuckStation will do all of the work for you. Technically you could target a certain BIOS, but honestly it doesn't make much sense. Now if you double click a game and you see the PlayStation splash boot up screen, that means that it has found the BIOS and it's ready to run PlayStation games. That doesn't mean we're done yet. We still have to go over controls and a ton of different visual settings, so don't skip out here unless you don't really feel like finding about all the fun in DuckStation. If you double click a game and you get this error message once you hit fresh boot, if you've tried to run it before and it fails to load the BIOS, that means the BIOS files are either missing or you have not targeted the correct folder. So just make sure you go back, make sure you have those files, and you tell DuckStation where they are. So long as you do all that, you're going to be booting up into a game and it's going to be running on your screen. Let me just go ahead and get into a direct capture so it looks a bit better. Crash Bandicoot here, 10 out of 10 game, absolutely love it. And on DuckStation, it is incredible. But one of the great things about DuckStation is its versatility and what it actually makes games look like. Because if I don't know if you remember PlayStation 1 that well or not, but Crash Bandicoot 2 did not run in widescreen, it did not look this good, it was not this sharp, and that is because I have pretty much every enhancement turned on currently for DuckStation. I'm going to show you different looks on screen, and then I'm going to go through all of the different settings and show you what they look like articulated in real time. This is with hardware rendering on, this is with software rendering. You're going to see that the screen becomes much more pixelated. It's still a really good look and it's subjective as to what you want to choose. If we go back here again and take another look, we'll turn that hardware rendering back on and everything smooths back over. This really makes the PlayStation 1 feel more like a weak PlayStation 2 in all honesty. And you will see that it's in widescreen, but we can jump back down to 4:3. Now, not every single game allows for widescreen without distortion. Here in Crash Bandicoot, when we expand the screen, Crash Bandicoot stays the same size, but a field of view gets bigger and everything else scales correctly. If we come down here into display and enhancements, that's where everything is going to be under settings. I'm now going to show you in real time with the menu up how to change all of these different things. So first we're going to go into the display mode, the paintbrush right there, and you're going to see the renderer by default is Vulkan. This is what I leave it as, but if you don't want any of the enhancements, you want it to look like a real PlayStation 1, you're going to select software. I feel like 9 out of 10 of you are going to want the enhancements, so we'll go right back to Vulkan. You'll also see we have this aspect ratio drop down menu. We can do game native, we can do match window, but I either toggle between 4:3 or 16:9. I find this to be the most useful bit for me personally. Now, integer scaling is basically a mathematically correct scale. I always leave it on. It's going to have the pixels change ever so slightly, and it's a little bit more accurate, but honestly, if I didn't even tell you about it, you probably wouldn't know it. And if for some reason you want to see the frames per second, you can 100% do that in the toggle menu. Now, all of the fun comes in enhancements. You have internal resolution scale, and I'm doing it 5x right now for 1080p. We can go down to 1x so that it is not internally scaling the PlayStation video whatsoever, and we can go all the way up to 4K, just depends on what you want. You can also set true rendering on, which disables the dithering and gives you a much smoother image. I know a lot of people like this, but honestly I prefer the dithering, so you're good to go there. And you'll see that there's also a widescreen hack icon. You want to make sure this is on if you're trying to make games run in widescreen. Otherwise, it's going to basically just distort the image and make everything wider. So be aware that if you want to go widescreen, you need to use that widescreen checkbox. And this is only in 3D games. I'll explain about 2D later. One thing the PlayStation 1 did was distort textures and polygons, so a lot of people like to check geometry correction. Honestly, if I'm enhancing the games, I usually leave it on. We'll leave it off for now just for fun. But that's how you end up getting an image that looks like this. We're going to go more in depth on a lot of the settings a little bit later in the video, but if you want to play Crash Bandicoot 2 in 16:9 with accurate pixels, with all of these enhancements, that is how you do it. And just so you know, when you turn off this PlayStation virtually or you quit the game, you can do a save state for resume if you hit yes. That way the next time you come into the game, if you just double click the Crash Bandicoot listing and you hit load state, it will bring you right back to where you were playing the game. It's basically a save state that enables itself upon the boot of the game a second time. 10 out of 10 recommend this feature, it is absolutely incredible. But let's go through all of the different settings and I'll get to controls after that. You'll see here in the game list, this is where you delineated where your games are, and if you want more than one folder for some reason, you totally can do that. As far as the BIOS is concerned, we've already showed you where to put it, so we are good to go. Console you should leave as auto detect, but you can set it as any different region, and you can enable 8 megabytes of RAM as well as a dev console unit. Not really a lot of reason to do this unless you're playing around with the different development software, and honestly if you're doing that, you're probably not watching a tutorial on how to get DuckStation run. You can overclock the CPU as well on games that might run slower. You're going to get a warning that this can cause instability, errors, and basically freezing in some of the games you use it on. So if you do want to overclock, you'll just hit yes. You can dial the CPU up to 1000% or 338 megahertz. Honestly, I don't really play around with overclocking too much. I want the games to kind of run at the speed they were supposed to. If you play around with this, just be aware that it can cause problems. And as far as the read and seek speed ups for that CD-ROM access, do not touch these. I've noticed they cause a little bit of instability. If you want a smooth experience, just leave it like it is. Now, under the emulation tab, you can change the emulation speed percentage, but just leave it at 100% or otherwise weird things are going to start happening. But but you can actually make PAL games run at 60 frames per second, and I will show you that in just a little bit. As far as memory card, it automatically defaults to making a new memory card file for each individual game you use, and that is the recommended way to do it. You don't need a virtual memory card with a bunch of different saves, unless you're doing something like Metal Gear Solid where you want Psycho Mantis to read your memory card to give you that little bit of an Easter egg information. Under display, we've already gone over it, but you have your hardware renderers, you have your software renderers, all the different things you need here. You'll see under adapter it goes to default. That'll just pick whatever GPU you use. If you want the original PlayStation 1 look, pick software. If you want those enhancements, I recommend Vulkan. This is the default. Everything else in here you can just play around with, different aspect ratios, things such as that. You can go ultra wide on some PlayStation games. I think it looks a little bit weird. If you want to just hit auto and have it pick whatever you want, you can do that. And as far as the overscan crop area, I just leave it as only overscan. That seems to get rid of everything. Like I showed you in the Crash Bandicoot example, integer upscaling is a good mathematically accurate way to scale it. Now under rendering enhancements, we have all of those different rendering internal resolutions. If you're playing on a 4K monitor, just go ahead and scale it to 4K. If you're playing on a 1080p or doing this for YouTube, you should be perfectly fine with that 5x. Texture filtering, nearest neighbor, perfectly fine. If you're playing around with this, you're doing it on your own just to see what looks. And as far as downsampling is concerned, just leave it disabled. Now that true color rendering, the 24-bit mode that disables dithering, this is just a subjective thing. It won't break anything, it won't improve anything unless you think it improves it. It is up to your eye. And you can force NTSC frame rate 60 Hz on PAL if you check this right here. The only reason you're going to want to do that is for PAL exclusives. Most of the time there is an NTSC version you can play and be perfectly fine with it, but just be aware that's there. And the last big one is geometry correction. This will fix all of the warping polygons and textures that you would see on original PlayStation 1 hardware. I'm going to leave it checked because people love that so much. The post-processing tab I don't do anything with whatsoever, and the audio should automatically default to QB. That's how you're going to get your audio out. Not a lot to deal with here. And some people really love retro achievements. Tell me down below if you like them. You can enable them. I don't do anything with it. And these are just the cache directories. They are automatically defaulted. You can leave them alone, as is that last menu right there. But of course these are video games and we do need to control them. Whatever controller you want to use is perfectly fine for you. You can even use keyboard, although I do not recommend it. I'm using an Xbox One S controller for this, and when I plug it in, it automatically defaults the controller bindings. You can have a digital controller, an analog controller, a gun con. If you want to see a tutorial on light gun games for the DuckStation core, let me know down below and I'll be happy to help. But if you do want to change any button configuration, just go ahead and click with your left mouse button and then push whatever button on the controller you're using that you want to bind to that. Just be aware that if you get a little bit too far gone, you can mix things up. There's a really easy way to deal with this. You're going to see here in global settings, we select the controller and we come over to controller port 1 and you're going to select automatic mapping. This will automatically read whatever controller that you select and it's going to assign all of the buttons accurately as to what the DuckStation developers think it should be. This is a massively good tool. It's awesome to use and I recommend it. And if you want a second player, just go through the same process on controller port 2. But playing around in DuckStation, Pepsi Man, one of the greatest funny games of all time, this just 100% works. It looks incredible under the Vulkan renderer. There is very little, if no lag, that is perceivable in the controls. This is just like playing a PlayStation 1 in real life, except it looks a hell of a lot better than you remember it. But I do want to talk about the different enhancements and sometimes when you wouldn't actually want to use them. Symphony of the Night here, one of the most famous games on PlayStation 1 and one of the best Castlevania games of all time, is a pure 2D game with a couple 3D assets. Be aware that you can't just widescreen this. Look at those two pink lines there that are accurate to the pixels on the edge. If we go to widescreen, it's going to distort the artwork and you're going to get an image that was not intended by the developer. Don't go widescreening 4x3 2D games. It's just never going to look correct. If you like it, that's fine, no judgments, but I'm telling you right now, you really shouldn't. But if you move over to Ridge Racer R4 here, I'm just going to go through a couple of the different looks you can achieve. This is Vulkan render in 4x3, basically the same aspect ratio you would see on a real PlayStation 1, but it looks a lot clearer with those geometry corrections. We can then move over to full 16:9 support with the 3D hacks enabled for widescreen, and now this looks like an early PlayStation 2 generation game. Not much you can do about driving into the wall there. It's hard to play a game while you're also capturing because you're thinking about what you're going to say, but we can do so many different things in DuckStation. We can go from this to this, which is the software renderer, and all I am doing is upscaling the resolution so that it doesn't look like complete mud on my capture device. That's the power of DuckStation. You have so many different ways to play the same game. You can play around with them, and you can go from a result like the pixelation you just saw to this full 16:9 that really does look like if it came out on launch day for the PlayStation 2, people would have been raving about the graphics. DuckStation just takes a PlayStation 1 and throws so many enhancements at it. You can have a completely different experience if you want, or you can run the software to make it seem like the original PlayStation 1 you remember, just with a better video out then composite out the back. But if you follow all the steps here, you will be playing PlayStation 1 on your Windows machine. If you have any questions, leave them down below, and don't forget I do have that Patreon link if you want to join up for Emulation Night School. It gets you direct access to me to help you if you have any issues finding anything you need to get this running, or if you have a weird error, I can pretty much walk you through it. But if you want to play PlayStation 1, you can import a PSX, you can have an original PlayStation 1, or you can probably do the smart thing and use DuckStation, or if you have FPGA, the MiSTer core. Short of that, I'll see you for the next tutorial next week. Bye bye.